Fellas, sometimes there are moments where I'm just looking at a fighter, the way that they carry themselves, promote themselves, or decisions that they do in or out of the octagon, and I genuinely can't comprehend what are they thinking, and I'm wondering why they did this and what they're trying to achieve. In other words, some of the dumbest decisions by fighters in the UFC. I'm not going to try heavily rely too much on in-octagon and fight IQ moments for this video, just general moments that fighters do that I don't know who advised them to do this or who told them that this would be a good idea. But some of the dumbest decisions by fighters. So let me know if I've missed any out on this list. I'm not going to try and go from too long ago, or else this would genuinely just be a T2 or T's compilation. But we'll go in there with the first moment, and it only happened a few weeks ago. Buckley at UFC St. Louis. Now, Buckley could have been a big star in the welterweight division. He had a really good win over Vicente Luque, which most people probably didn't think he was going to win. And then he went out there and beat Ruziboyev, a fighter who the UFC probably thought was going to beat Buckley, which is why they put him in a co-main event in St. Louis with the world watching, in his home crowd. And he goes out there and beats Ruziboyev. That's a big win. Now Buckley's in the conversation for the top 10 of the welterweight division. And he grabs the mic, and rather than calling out a fighter that could potentially push him close to that title, like a Gilbert Burns or maybe even an Ian Garry, because everyone in the welterweight division wants Ian Garry at this point, he called out Conor McGregor. He called out Conor McGregor. One of the dumbest call-outs you could possibly make, because first of all, it's never going to happen, man. Like, it's never going to happen. If you're going to call out Conor McGregor, at least do it on, like, a tweet. Not in the post-fight interview when the whole world is watching and you have the chance to call out a welterweight. And the dude calls out Conor McGregor. It wasn't even, like, a nice call. It was, like, the cringiest call-out, an embarrassing call-out as well. That would never happen. Like, first of all, why would McGregor choose you? There's about 50 other opponents that make a lot more sense before Buckley. That fight literally has no correlation whatsoever with McGregor. I don't know why he called out Conor McGregor. But the thing is, it's not even just a call out of McGregor, which is the bad part. It's the way that he's kind of just ruined his reputation on Twitter recently. So if you've not been keeping up with Twitter, pretty much everyone on Twitter hates Buckley now. He's beefing with guys like Cub Swanson, which is random. He's even had, like, back and forth with Kevin Holland. He's compared, I think he compared himself to GSP as well. The dude's kind of just made an embarrassment of himself recently on Twitter. I don't know who his social media PR team are, but they need to be fired as soon as possible, because Buckley could have been a fan favourite, a big star in the welterweight division. He could have got a big fight by now, and he's just blown it up in flames because he called out Conor McGregor and decided to act like an idiot on Twitter. Still an exciting fighter, and I'm still going to watch his next fight, don't get me wrong, but this dude, man, I don't know who his social media manager is or who advised him to do this, but they need to be sacked as soon as possible. He could have had a big fight. He could have been a fan favourite. He could have been pushed close to that title shot, but now that he's kind of ruined his reputation on Twitter, and he's known, you know, for being that annoying notification that you get on Twitter nowadays, I've got to include Buckley on this list. Out of everyone you could have called out, you called out Conor McGregor. It's never going to happen. McGregor was close to not fighting Chandler, which made the most sense. Why on earth would he fight Buckley? So I don't even know if McGregor's even acknowledged the call out as well, which makes things worse. So yeah, Buckley calling out McGregor, and then his Twitter antics definitely have to make the list. And then we're going to go back to a few years ago, and we're going to go down to the bantamweight and the flyweight division, and we're going to be talking about Henry Cejudo. And if you don't know what I'm talking about when he quit in his prime. So Henry Cejudo had one of the best streaks in the UFC. He was on a streak of wins over Demetrius Johnson, one of the greatest of all time. Some people would say he's the greatest of all time. TJ Dillashaw, Dominic Cruz, Sergio Pettis. This dude was on an absolute streak in the flyweight division, getting wins over people. He started finishing people more as well. Finished Dominic Cruz, became a champion, a double champion as well. He had 2 belts. He was in the peak of his career. And the dude decides to take a massive break and essentially retire in the peak of his career, in his prime, when he could have got a lot more finishes, when he could have genuinely cemented himself into that greatest of all time list. The whole world was watching Henry Cejudo's run, and the dude decides to retire because he wants more money. And that obviously didn't work for him, because he came back a few years later, fought against Aljamain Sterling, didn't look half as good as he once did, got beaten by Sterling, and then he fights Merab. And I'm just telling you, the second that Merab picked up Henry Cejudo from the floor, that was when Cejudo's legacy went up in flames. That was when everyone forgot what Cejudo had done, and we just remembered Merab. That was an embarrassing moment for Henry Cejudo. Honestly, quitting in his prime was a bad idea because of what he could have achieved, but then coming back and fighting Merab and Sterling only took even more hits to his legacy. Again, I don't know who his manager is and who advised him that this would have been a good idea. If you're going to retire, at least retire in like after you've taken maybe one loss or after you've made a decent run. This dude started off as like his flyweight and entering the bantamweight division so well, and then he decided to retire. And it's all gone up in flames now. I only remember Henry Cejudo in recent memory for getting demolished by Merab, and that's what most people are going to remember him for now. He had potential to have a great legacy, blew it up in flames. So that's going to go down as one of the dumbest moments. And talking about midgets, Volkanovski. Now, I'm a fan favourite of Volkanovski, but this guy, a year ago from now, Volkanovski he'd just come off an amazing fight with pound for pound Islam Makhachev. The whole world loved the fight. It was a great fight. A lot of people thought Volkanovski won, and he was genuinely one of the best fighters in the UFC, and he was preparing to go out there and dominate and just destroy Yair Rodriguez. And fast forward a year later, you look at Volkanovski's record, and he's coming off 2 knockouts in the first and the second round. I mean, the first bad problem was fighting Islam Makhachev on short notice. Islam Makhachev was the only dude to beat Volkanovski in the UFC. By far the most difficult fight for Volkanovski. And rather than having a full training camp, potentially winning a second belt and getting the biggest win, or at least one of the biggest wins in UFC history, you decide to fight him. I think it was on 10 days' notice. That was already a bad decision. I don't know who Volkanovski's team is and who decided that was a good idea. That was not a good idea for Volkanovski. I know he likes to stay active, but you could have at least had a full training camp. Goes out there, gets knocked out for the first time in his UFC career against Islam Makhachev, and then to make things worse, he comes back fairly quickly as well. I think it was only 4 pay-per-views later and fights the undefeated, dangerous contender Ilia Topuria at UFC 298. I mean, we all knew that fight was next, but it could have happened at like a later date. Fighting him 4 pay-per-views after you've just been knocked out was a terrible idea. And what happened? We all know. He got knocked out by Ilia Topuria. And now he's in a state where Volkanovski genuinely could have, and I'm not saying he would have beaten Makhachev in the rematch even if he did have a full camp, but he could have had a good go at fighting Islam Makhachev with a proper training camp when it was a proper, it was a more close fight, and he could have had a good go and potentially even beaten Topuria if he hadn't been knocked out by Islam. And instead now he's here without a single belt, with 2 knockouts. He's coming off 2 knockout losses, and we honestly don't know what's next for Volkanovski. So Volkanovski fighting on short notice on 2 different occasions, terrible decisions, and it honestly ruined the beginning of, well, not the beginning of his career, but ruined what could have ended as a fairy tale ending to his career. The next one, I'm going to go even more recently. Now, I know I said I don't want to talk about in-octagon performances too much, but I've just got to slide this one in there. UFC 301 main event. Steve Erceg versus Pantoja. Steve Erceg could have been the champion, man. Steve Erceg could have been the flyweight champion of the world. The dude was at what? Rank number 10, came down and fought Pantoja, the best flyweight. He could have been a champion if he didn't go for that one takedown in the 5th round. That's actually crazy, you know. If Steve Erceg didn't go for a takedown against a superior grappler, one of the best grapplers in the UFC, the guy that has pretty much won the fight by out-grappling him, if he didn't shoot a takedown in that 5th round and let Pantoja take it and then get the dominant position in the grappling exchange, Steve Erceg honestly could have been a champion right now. I mean, the fight is close as it is. A lot of people think it was a robbery, but what must have put the stamp on the judges' scorecard was that takedown attempted by Steve Erceg in that last round. It was a bad decision. Listen, Steve Erceg, he's pretty new to the UFC. He's obviously inexperienced, but I can't help but think that he could have been the champion right now if he didn't shoot that one takedown. So I've just got to quickly get over that. Next, we're going to be talking about inactivity. And when I think of inactivity, there's only one guy that comes to mind, and that guy is Khamzat Chimaev. Now, Khamzat Chimaev, he's not as inactive as some fighters, but honestly, he could have had a lot of fights, and his momentum has completely gone. I did a video not too long ago where I talked about how Khamzat Chimaev's destroying his career, and his inactivity has a large part to do with that. Obviously, he was once a super active fighter. In fact, he fought twice in 1 week when he joined the twice in 1 week when he joined the UFC. Then he only fought a few months later. Essentially, he was a fighter with a lot of momentum, a lot of hype to his name, and he was demolishing everyone. Goes out there and demolishes Li Jingliang, and then he has to fight with Burns. And it was ever since the Gilbert Burns fights where things kind of go wrong for Khamzat Chimaev. So he has to fight with Gilbert Burns. It was a close fight. Some people thought it was a robbery and thought Burns should have won. And then he obviously misses weight against Kevin Holland. And it's the inactivity that ruins him. He fought from April all the way to September, which is a fairly big layoff, nothing crazy. And after the Kevin Holland fight, this was the big problem. Took him over a year to get back in there after the Kevin Holland fight. And I'm not saying it was all his fault. I know he had visa issues and his health weren't perfect, but this dude had beaten Kevin Holland. He was talking about getting a championship and becoming the first potential 3-divisional champion, and he took over a year off after the Kevin Holland fight. That was his first problem. So then he fought Kamaru Usman at UFC 294, and now he's got to fight months after against Robert Whittaker in Saudi Arabia. And I'm just saying, if Chimaev was that little bit more active, he could have got to where he wanted to be in the division. I mean, remember, Alex Pereira joined the UFC after Khamzat Chimaev and has managed to acquire 2 belts. Khamzat Chimaev his inactivity is costing him, man. He started the UFC career with so much momentum, and I've just got to include Chimaev's inactivity on here because he could have fought for a belt by now, man. He could have been at that title picture, and I feel like his momentum has completely slowed down because of how inactive he's been. So I've got to include Chimaev in this list and his inactivity. But that is some of the dumbest decisions by fighters in the UFC. A quick list that I've had to make, especially after UFC 301 and that Buckley call out. Let me know if I've missed any out in recent history. This is just a short list, and again, I'm not going to go back all the way back to the Tito Ortiz era, but these are some of the dumbest decisions by fighters. Let me know your thoughts on these decisions, and thank you for watching.